The topic that we're going to deal with tonight in specific terms was the Syrian refugee problem and what should be the Jewish response. And in a broader sense, what we're talking about is universalism and particularism within Jewish consciousness. When you discuss the issue of Jewish identity, the topic immediately turns to the uniqueness of the Jew or the specific aspect of the Jew. And we talk about Jews and the Jewish people and relate among the Jewish people and so forth and so forth. And that's usually a very strong focus in talking about Jewish communal identity and relationships. Helping out Jews, caring for Jews, and so forth. What is often overlooked is the perception of the Jew from a universal perspective. In other words, not looking at the Jew as Jew, but looking at the Jew as human being. And then looking at humanity as the collective that would include the Jews. And that becomes somewhat of an issue in terms of how is the group of Jews connect within the grouping of humanity. On the individual level, we can think about how we see ourselves as human beings, and then we can see ourselves as how we see ourselves as Jews, and then how we see the collective of Jews in relating to humanity. And this yields a tremendous amount of questions, because what it deals with is, why is the Jew unique? The classic question that was phrased, I mean, it's usually considered to be the big question of Christianity posed, but it was obviously perhaps existence beforehand, is why did God distinguish the Jewish people? And then in distinguishing the Jewish people, how do you then relate to the Jewish people as part of humanity? And within Jewish thought, you see some major disagreements in this regard. There are clearly positions within Jewish thought that are very adamant about the uniqueness of Jewish identity, to the extent that it was very strongly identifying Jews as part of the collective of Jews, with very limited further connection to humanity. Now, for example, one of the concepts of the uniqueness of Jewish identity is in the idea of the Jewish soul, right? That Jews are inherently unique because they have unique souls. Now, that concept is perhaps the most common concept that a lot of people talk about. We talk about the Yiddish Nishma and so forth. The concept itself is not so simple. The fact is, the most strongest definition of the Yiddish Nishma as a very distinct factor that really makes Jews very, very different than non-Jews is perhaps in the concept of Balatanya, okay, Shneur Zalman of Ladi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. So that's a very strong statement, even to the extent that there's perceptions found in the perception of the Jewish concept of Messianism, that the concept of Bias Mashiach is more specific a Jewish concept. Yes, there will be some Jews who will be saved with the coming of Mashiach, but basically the coming of Mashiach will be an identification of the Jews, and an idea that there will be a proper combination to life, and in that regard, many non-Jews, or the majority of non-Jews, will not benefit in Bias Mashiach, because they already lost, and that's really strong, found in a very strong definition of the non-Jewish neshama being negative. That's one viewpoint, which really plays down the universal side of Judaism. The other viewpoint, now, the truth is, even with people who do talk about Yiddish and neshama, they're not as strong in that definition as the Baal HaTanya. So the Kuzari, for example, in his definition of Yiddish and neshama, basically says that the Jew has a unique talent, basically in terms of prophecy, but that is not to mean any really strong degradation of non-Jews. And therefore, the fact is, as the Baal HaTanya says, non-Jews can convert and become Jews. And in the Baal HaTanya's understanding of them converting to become Jews, they do not get a Yiddish neshama. So he says, for example, many non-Jews, when they become Jews, they're Jews. They're halakhically Jews. They don't get a Yiddish neshama. But they are Jews as equal as any other Jews. And that he says, Shmayin and Otalian, who were descendants from Geram, they did not have Yiddish neshamas, but obviously they were leaders of the Jewish people. And that's an indication of a much more humanistic idea of a universalism, which is really reflected in the Kuzari, actually developing a book like a Kuzari, which basically says that Judaism on a certain level is to reach out to the world. The most powerful definition of that universalism is really found in the concept of the Rambam. The Rambam basically, and there were people who will disagree with this, specifically Lubavitchers, but basically most people in the study of the Rambam recognize that the Rambam did not accept the concept of the Yiddish neshama. Now, the fact is, the truth is, if you read Lubavitcher's understanding of the Yad HaZaka, when the Rambam talks about the neshama, they'll say the Rambam means the Yiddish neshama. But if you look in the language of the Rambam himself, he never refers to a Yiddish neshama. He talks about all human beings being equal in terms of their souls. What's the distinction of Jewishness according to the Rambam? The fact that you accept Torah. So the distinction of Jewishness was nurture, that the Jewish people were affected by the study of Torah, and it was a nurturing of the Jewish people that made them distinct, but not inherent nature in terms of their soul. And that's why when he writes to Avadia Hager, in his famous letter to Avadia Hager, he says, "You're a son of Abraham because you saw the truth. And you're a Jew like any other Jew because you accept Torah." Which really opens up the Rambam's perception of universalism, which really ties to the Rambam's perspective of Mashiach. Because if you look at the concept of Mashiach from the Rambam, the Mashiach is not just specifically for the Jews, the Mashiach is for the entire world. So if you read the Rambam's perception of Mashiach, the Mashiach will come and bring peace and knowledge of God to the entire humanity. Okay? It's also interesting in terms of the Rambam's famous statement about the purpose of Christianity and Islam, which is part of the censored Rambam. It's not found in our Rambam, but it was kept in the Sephardic Rambams, where the Rambam asks the question of what was the purpose of God maintaining Christianity and Islam. You want to try for the answer?
Hirsch talks about it in 1900.
Well, Hirsch talks, because Hirsch is a universalist. Okay? But remember, Shimshon Hirsch was a universalist and very anti-Zionist. Okay? In terms of modern Zionism. We'll get to that. Okay? Shimshon Hirsch had no patience for Zionism. Okay? We'll get to that in a sec.
Didn't Rambam think Islam and Christianity would bring the world to ethical monotheism?
Yes. That's exactly correct. The Rambam says that the reason God allowed for Christianity and Islam to exist, it's very interesting in terms of his language, because he basically was, why did God let that blankety blank him exist and this blankety blank this guy exist? Not very nice language. It shows that he didn't really think too much about the founders of these religions. But the fact that he says because the non-Jews could not accept the pure monotheism of Torah directly, okay, because the pure monotheism of Torah would be too hard for them to grasp. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu created intermediary steps which introduces them to Torah and God and monotheism, which eventually will make them open to the understanding of the true God of Torah, eventually leading to Bias HaMashiach. Okay? So the Rambam is the prototype of the Universalist. Now, the fact is these are very powerful perspectives. By the way, when I say in terms of Shimshon Hirsch, since I commented on it, Shimshon Hirsch obviously was a Zionist. You can't be an Orthodox rabbi without being a Zionist. You have to have the idea of a caring for Eretz Yisrael and so forth. What Shimshon Hirsch had no tolerance for in any way was any form of Jewishness that was not Orthodox. Okay? So Shimshon Hirsch was very much against, and it was in contradiction to the Raya Kook. The Raya Kook found a value in secular Zionism and said that, and according to the Raya Kook, according to Rav Kook, he said these people obviously have driven by the neshamas to go back to Eretz Yisrael and so forth and so forth, and it's a good thing they want to go back to Eretz Yisrael and so forth. So even though they're eating chazer, he actually believed one day they'll do tshuva and all these people will come back to Torah, but he said basically you have to understand that their drive to be connected to Israel comes from the good part of the neshama, even though they're not following other mitzvahs, and he has a whole development like that. But according to Shimshon Hirsch, he had no patience for any non-Orthodox Jewishness. So therefore, he would have nothing to do with Reform Judaism in Germany. Absolutely no connection because they were not halachic, and he would not want any connection with political Zionism, secular Zionism, because it did not accept Torah. In fact, there are arguments that I read that the Aguda's original position of not being involved in the World Zionist Council, the World Zionist Organization, WZO and so forth, was that the Aguda, unlike Mizrahi did get involved in the general Zionist desire. It says that the Aguda had no desire, had no involvement. So people think it was, the Polish Hasidim and so forth. It seems to be that the major force in Aguda that absolutely declared no connection to the Zionist organizations really came from the Hirschians. Hirschians basically said, we will not become part of Aguda unless you have absolutely nothing to do with non-halachic organizations, okay, including the Zionist movement. And it seems to be that the Hirschians were really the ones who were most adamant about it. But we'll get to that. But the fact is, though, is that what you're really dealing with on a certain level is a tension that exists within Jewish thought between universalism within Jewishness and particularism within Jewishness. In the sense is, and I don't want to specifically focus on Zionism and so forth, but the fact is are you thinking in terms of humanity, or are you thinking in terms of Jews? Okay? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You're supposed to love your neighbor. Who's that talking about? So halachically it means Jews. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha means reacha b'mitzvah, so it's specifically about Jews. But the fact is should you be charitable to non-Jews? Should you care for non-Jews? Should you be involved in assisting non-Jews? Okay? And the answer is?
After you've finished taking care of your own. Yeah. Taking your own people.
But are you ever finished?
So the Rambam says, and I've just told you the Rambam is a universalist, but the Rambam says, the fact is the Ramban also says it with a different distinction. The fact of the matter is is a distinction, first of all, is made between two types of non-Jews. Right? What are the two types of non-Jews you see a distinction? Non-Jews who are monotheists and non-Jews who aren't monotheists, right? So the fact is, the Rambam says clearly in Hilchos Malachim that you have an obligation to take care of Noachites. He uses the term Ger Toshevs and so forth, but the fact of the matter is you have an obligation to take care of them. L'chachayot, to take care of them. The same way you have an obligation towards a Jew, you have an obligation to take care of Noachites. And he takes it one step further, and he says that you have an obligation even to do charitable work for idolaters. So he says you have a mitzvah to bury idolaters. It's interesting, his language. His language is amongst Jews. So he says you have an obligation to bury non-Jews amongst Jews, which all the commentators point out, the Rambam does not mean you bury non-Jews in the Jewish cemetery. What the Rambam means is the same way you are to be concerned about the burial of Jews, you should be concerned about the burial of idolaters. You should be concerned about the Bikur Cholim of idolaters. And for sure, there's a mitzvah to give tzedakah even to idolaters, right, as you give tzedakah with Jews. Okay, so the Rambam clearly says that there's a universal aspect to Jewishness and so forth. The point is, the Ramban also says this. The Ramban actually counts it as one of the Tariq mitzvot, specifically in terms of Noachites. What he uses the word Geri Toshav. He says there is absolutely an obligation to take care of non-Jews who are monotheists. Yeah. That creates the idea of, is our focus on universalism or is our focus on particular? It obviously touches upon the Syrian refugee problem. Okay? Here you have human beings who are in need. So the truth is, should Jews be involved in taking care of non-Jews in need, such as Syrian refugees? So it seems clearly, according to the Rambam and others, that yes, there's an obligation. Not necessarily the only obligation amongst Jews and so forth. Not necessarily only after you take care of Jews, because the Rambam says as you take care of Jews in poverty, you should take care of non-Jews in poverty. But the fact is that there is a universal concept of Jewishness. And then the question is how you balance it. Now, the problem with the Syrian refugees is a little bit of a problem because they're not just necessarily non-Jews, they also could be Sunni Yisrael. Right, so they could be people who are enemies, and then you have further problems of that nature also. The problem exists in terms of last week's Parsha. This is something that really is pointed out. Okay? Abraham goes to bat for who? Stone. Stone wasn't a nice place. Right? Okay? Okay, Avram already showed his concern with the king of Stone, that Stone wasn't really his friend. But the fact is Abraham, as part of Avram's nature, said, I am concerned about Stone. Okay? And the point is that if you sit there and say you're concerned about Sonei Yisrael and so forth, you're left with an interesting issue. Why would Abraham go to bat for Stone? To save the Rishayim of Stone. Right? And everyone talks about it. It's a great thing. Abraham's a Baal Chesed. But think about it. He is not going to bat for just non-Jews. He's going to bat for non-Jews who are clearly the epitome of a certain form of evil. The pasuk specifically says that these are that in a few psukim in the Chumash, it specifically says these are bad people. The Chumash doesn't specifically tell us what their evil was, but it's clearly that they are bad. And they're so bad that God destroys this one city, even though there were many, many other cities at the time who weren't exactly, you know, nice places to live. Put it that way, right? I mean, you look through the history over there. The fact is that you see in Egypt, Mitzrayim, they, it's that they weren't necessarily the nicest people either, and so forth. The fact is, the storm was really bad, and yet you have to deal with the issue where Abraham is actually willing to go to bat for these people. Please don't kill them. And that's something that's very, when you think about it, you know, everyone talks to it shows what kind of caring person Abraham is. But
only on the condition the proviso there was that if there's 10 tzaddikim.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If there were 10 tzaddikim, it would save the whole city. Right? He's still trying to save the whole city. Right now, there are arguments if there's 10 tzaddikim, maybe they could do tshuva and create tshuva. But the fact is that he's basically saying if there were 10 tzaddikim, let's save all of them, including the people who are really Rishonim. The vast majority which are Rishonim. So some interesting concepts over here in terms of Ram's aspect towards non-Jews. And it really raises a lot of issues in terms of understanding our relationship with non-Jews. Now, the fact is, it's an interesting Gemara in Sanhedrin. Okay? Gemara Sanhedrin says, why did God create Adam one person? Right? Why did Adam create one person?
No one could say, yeah, I'm better than you, you're better than me. We all have the same answer.
So the truth is, in the language of the Gemara, there's different girsot. Our girsa says, so no Jew will be able to say to another Jew, I'm better than you because we all come from the same father. Right? We're all descended from Adam Rishon. Good argument, right? But who's all descended from Adam Rishon?
Rishonim too.
Yeah, and who else? Now, the Gemara actually says so that Yisrael, he says to show you that saving one life of a Jew is equal to saving the entire world. But the Gemara actually says one life of a Jew. One Jewish life is equal. He said, this is to tell you that saving one Jewish life is equal to saving the entire world because we are all descended from Adam Rishon.
The challenge all the other nations.
Fact is that who's descended from Adam Rishon? All human beings. So the truth is the argument should be anyone who is to tell you that all human beings have the same forefather. Now the truth is there are girsas that include that. And there's a difference in girsa, by the way, means the way the language is presented. In other words, as the Gemara was transmitted, you had different versions. Girsot is really different versions, and some version, the version is the more accepted version. Say, if you look in the Vilna Shas, says Mi Yisrael, but there are versions that just say all human beings, and it raises an issue in terms of how Jews look at humanity, and it becomes somewhat of an issue, in a sense that we talk about Klal Yisrael, we talk about the importance of Klal Yisrael, and I'm not denying the importance of Klal Yisrael. And I'm not denying that there's a certain amount of cheshek and ava that we have amongst Klal Yisrael. We are clearly to be concerned about Klal Yisrael over everyone else. In Staka, for example, obviously a Jew goes first, and so forth. But the fact is that there is somewhat of an issue from a Jewish perspective of how we look at humanity. And this becomes a real issue in our world. And it's, I think, one of the most powerful issues in our world today. Okay? Because, and I was joking about this before, but I really mean it. If you look in terms of liberal Judaism in the States, I'm not talking about liberal Orthodoxy, I'm talking about liberal Judaism in the United States. What you find is most liberal Jews are liberals, right? They vote Democrat across the board and so forth. And they say they vote Democrat because they're Jews. And a lot of frum Jews sit there and say, wait a second, you're not thinking of what's really good for Eretz Yisrael. because usually with the liberals you find a more detrimental position in terms of how they deal with Eretz Yisrael. Okay? But the fact is when Barack Obama says that he's the closest thing to a Jew that's ever been in the White House, and he made that statement. Okay? He did make that statement. I forget where, but he did make a statement to one of his... Remember, his chief of staffs were generally all Jewish. Right? He had a lot of Jewish friends. So he basically, said to one of them that I'm the closest thing to a Jew, closest person to a Jew who's ever been in the White House. And the fact of the matter is he meant it. Why did he mean it?
Well, he thinks he's doing Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam, please don't use the term. Okay. Tikkun Olam, as understood within Reform Judaism. It's very interesting that term is something that has been taken over Reform Judaism, and both classical understandings of Tikkun Olam, whether the more mystical understanding of Tikkun Olam, which is the Tikkun Olam of the Malchus Shakai, which basically is a religious connotation, which is, it's interesting, I just spoke about this in my shir this morning also. The fact of the matter is that Tikkun Olam, in the classical mystical perspective, is talked about the Tikkun Olam Malchut Shakai, which is to fix the world in the kingdom of heaven, right? Which is basically a religious concept. Okay? But you know, the last statement in the Al Kenekava by Helenu, that it's the idea of the world will recognize God, which is the ultimate tikkun. Even the Rambam says the ultimate tikkun of Bias Mashiach in terms of the universal concept. Okay, that's one concept of Tikkun Olam. The second concept of Tikkun Olam is from the Gemara in Gittin. And the concept of Gemara in Gittin's concept of Tikkun Olam is things that are necessary to protect society. Okay? Not in terms of helping the poor, but actually protecting society. So, for example, wage and price controls is a form of Tikkun Olam in the Gemara in Gittin. Okay? So the fact is I forget the exact cases there, but the Gemara talks about doing things to protect the well-functioning of society in terms of that is functioning and so forth. Classic examples being, and I love telling this story, the classic examples of the fishermen in Europe who didn't put out their fish on Friday, kept it on Thursday, kept it for Friday, and tried selling it at double the price because they knew the Jews would all buy fish because they eat fish for their Shabbos meals. So the fishermen put out fish and really raised the price, knowing the Jews would buy it on Friday. No fish available Thursday, Friday, prices skyrocket, Jews bought it, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so the fishermen thought they had a great plan. Okay, what happened? Well, the rabbi knew the concept of Tikkun Olam. So what did the rabbi do in that town? He put out an edict in the next week that said, no fish on Fridays. No fish on Shabbos. Sorry, no fish on Shabbos. So he basically put out an edict throughout the town that Jews should not buy fish for this Shabbos. So all these fishermen, they kept their fish, put it out Friday, and guess what? They couldn't sell it. They started saying, hey, don't you want some fish for your Sabbath? No, thank you. We're not taking fish this Shabbos. So they basically lost all their fish. So they went to speak to the rabbi, and they said, okay, here's the story. Raise the prices, I come out and say, no fish on Sabbath. Maintain normal prices, and we'll let people buy fish on Shabbos. That's a concept of Tikkun Olam, according to the Gemara in Gittin. Okay, so that's what Tikkun Olam. But your understanding of Tikkun Olam, which is humanitarianism and so forth, that's really the term that, as it was adopted by Reform Judaism and became this humanitarian concept, which doesn't mean it's wrong. That concept would be the concept that the Rambam talks in terms of Derech Shalom. The Rambam says that we should do these things for Derech Shalom. But the fact is, by the way, the Rambam's language when he says that in terms of we should give charity to non-Jews because of Shalom, a lot of people think it's because we don't want to cause rifts with non-Jews and so forth and so forth. The fact is a lot of people, and you've seen the Rambam, and I heard of Vilna Gaon understood it this way, he meant it in the positive sense. We want there to be shalom and camaraderie among humanity. It's not just a statement not to cause problems with non-Jews because they'll get angry at us and cause machlokesim with us. But the fact is we want to have a world of peace and camaraderie among humanity. But the concept is how you balance it and how you understand Jewish identity. And this becomes a very difficult idea. Now what I was saying is liberals in the United States, this is the way they understand Judaism. The way they were taught Judaism and it was the aspect that you care for the poor. And they understood it in the universal sense. And Jews took great pride in this. It's interesting because my wife and I had a movie night last night. My wife ended up falling asleep in this movie because she didn't like it. I ended up watching it. It was a movie, Selma, right? Which is an okay movie to watch. Okay. Anyways, but what hit me about Selma, I didn't know this. I was telling my wife, this is interesting. Jews marched at Selma. Okay. Abraham Heschel was supposedly in the front row, right beside Martin Luther King, and Saul Berman, and Orthodox Jews marched in Selma. Saul Berman was at Selma, right? So I'm watching this movie. I say to my wife, "Gotta watch the Jews. They're marching Selma. I'm wondering how they portray Abraham Heschel." I'm watching.
They don't.
No Jews.
No Jews.
They had the Greek Orthodox Archbishop. They made sure they had nuns. How could they not have Jews? So that tells you a statement about the modern world. Okay. The fact is, though, is that, and Jews are proud. A lot of Jews are proud that people marched at Selma, because it was an aspect of humanitarianism that's universal. Okay, and this is part of being Jewish. And to many Jews, that's what's expressed about their Jewishness, that we are universal humanitarians. The issue then arises is when Barack Obama says we're Jewish. The fact is you're now dealing with universal humanitarianism. So the question that then arises is that, well, where's the place of concern for the Jewish people in a primary sense? And that becomes a very interesting issue, in the sense that what we're dealing with is on one hand we have very strong viewpoints that are very nationalistic in terms of Jewishness, almost to the extreme that we're only concerned about Jews. But the truth is there are many, many sources that say we should be concerned universally across the board, okay, and try to affect the world in a universal sense.
But
on the other hand,
this is very dangerous because we did it already. You know that the Bolshevik and the Russian it was done by Jews.
Yes.
So what?
Exactly.
Sometimes we do things that are too dangerous.
The fact is what you're raising is an interesting problem, and that's really and that's why when you deal with things like the Syrian refugee problem, especially you throw in the fact that they're Soni Yisrael, then I throw you stone and so forth and so forth. The fact of the matter is the Jew is faced with conflicting values. Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik makes a statement. He says there's a big difference between the Jewish concept of the thesis and antithesis and the Hegelian concept of thesis and antithesis. He says the Hegelian concept of thesis and antithesis leads to synthesis, right? Which is somehow how these two concepts join together. He says in the Jewish concept of thesis and antithesis, we are called upon to maintain both values, both contradictory values at the exact same time, and to live with the conflict. Obviously, pasking a certain way in halacha, but basically living with the fact that it is a conflict that basically tears us apart. and creates a tremendous amount of tension. That's why a lot of people don't like the Rav's philosophy, because the Rav's philosophy is very tense, right? He points this out, for example. He says it in terms of holidays. He says on Tisha B'Av is the great day of mourning. On the other hand, Tisha B'Av is referred to as a moed, right? In other words, somehow it's supposed to have some aspect of a simcha in it. I mean, it creates both. He says by Purim has to coexist with the fact that it's preceded by a fast day. On Purim, if you really look at the story of Purim, there's a tremendous tragedy that exists on Purim. What's the tragedy of Purim? Esther's life, right? Esther is total tragic figure, right, in terms of Purim. And we're all celebrating, and this woman went through, basically, gave herself up for the Jewish people. He says the fact is that's common throughout Jewish concepts. We are called upon to think twice. Pesach, right? Pesach. We spill out wine over those Rishonim, right? That these Soni Yisrael, the Egyptians, died. Supposed to feel a little bit of a loss in that. The fact is that's the humanitarian aspect of the Jewish perspective. We are called upon to coexist in these two ideas, and how we balance them is a tremendous problem. Right. And the fact is what you find in terms of liberal Jews in the United States is they're overtaken by universal humanitarianism, which is the way they had been taught about Jewishness, right? Which, by the way, if you know the history of American Judaism, it very much flows from a universal form of Judaism, because American Judaism began with Reform Judaism, and Reform Judaism basically perceived themselves as a universal religion. The distinction between Jew and non-Jew pursuant to Reform Judaism, the classical Reform Judaism, had nothing to do with national identity. It had something to do with belief. If you believed in Judaism, you were a Jew. If you didn't believe in Judaism, you weren't a Jew. Which basically was the basis of the patrilineal descent decision, but that's another discussion. But the point is in classic Reform Judaism, they rejected any concept of return to Zion. They basically said nationalistic. Talking about classic Reform Judaism, okay, which also dominated, North American, Reform Judaism, and American Reform Judaism was the basis of the Jewish perspective until for many years, and the fact is it was a totally universal concept. Jews were not distinguished based upon Am Yisrael. They were distinguished based upon, this is my religion. Okay, you're Jewish if you believe this. You're not Jewish if you don't believe that. That's why, according to Reform Judaism, the issue of the Bishop of Paris being Jewish is a non-starter. He's not Jewish. Why? Because he doesn't believe in Judaism. The fact is that really is where you start seeing universal Jewishness in Reform Judaism, which really dominated America. And therefore, if you look at the development of the day school system in the United States, Jews, very committed Jews, were against day schools in the United States. Why? Because we want to integrate with all people. Because really there's a strong universalism, and there was a universalism in terms of caring and so forth and so forth. So what's happening is, in many ways, is you see this universalism in liberal Jewishness in the United States, which, yes, at first was very pro-Israel, because our people, and there was a nationalist aspect that even infiltrated Reform Judaism, because they couldn't survive without the Am Yisrael part. So eventually Reform Judaism became Zionistic, even though they really were anti-Zionistic at first, but especially with the creation of the State of Israel, it became Zionistic. Jews started, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that a lot of non-Reform Jews started becoming integrated into the American Jewish populace, and there was a concept of Am Yisrael, but Jews basically didn't like the idea of being segregated, and we just want to promote our values of universalism and caring for everyone and so forth and so forth. So they were against any type of segregation. of Jews, which is what the day school system is about. And the fact is that when Eretz Yisrael was founded, it was in line with this universal idea because the Jews were in need. So if it wasn't Jews, we'd be fighting for someone else, like blacks or whatever, which has a value. But once Eretz Yisrael becomes strong and up and running, and we're actually a good nation, okay, then this universal Jewishness is going to be concerned with anyone else, right? And therefore, whoever they define as being in need, without looking any further. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the problem that exists is the need. There is a need. And by the way, you see this in terms of many, many Jews in Eretz Yisrael who are strong nationalistic Jews. They're willing to work with the Arab population, assist the Arab population, and try and help with the Arab population. The fact of the matter is the problem is that there's segments of the Arab population that doesn't want to grow. You know, there's an interesting thing where I pointed out, which I want to point out. I'm going to write an article. I want to point out about Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X, the strong black activist of the 60s. A lot of people think he was anti-Semitic, right? Okay. The truth of the matter is, Malcolm X had a very interesting, positive aspect towards the Jewish people. What happened is the reason the blacks had a very strong anti-Jewish feeling was because it came out of Harlem. Okay? Who were the landlords that the blacks in Harlem had to deal with? They were white, but specifically Jews, because Harlem was a Jewish area. So the whites that were the landlords in Harlem, right, which then the blacks had problems with, for whatever reason, it might just been issues and so forth. They were whites, but they were specifically Jews. So blacks had a specific negative feeling towards the Jews because they were the whites
towards Jewish landlords, not
well, actually towards Jews, because the landlords weren't necessarily bad, but the fact of the matter is they were the white guy who had the money, right, or supposedly blah. Malcolm X said, wait a second, they're Jews. And he said, they came over here from Europe with nothing. And then they built up themselves and actually made something of themselves. They're not like the whites down in the South on their plantations who basically took advantage of anyone. They worked hard and they made themselves and they built themselves up. What we should be doing is learning from them and not fighting them.
That's not in the movie either.
No, Malcolm X didn't have that in the movie either. But the fact of the matter is, Malcolm X said basically, wait a second, what we should be doing is connecting with these Jews and find out how they did it. And following them as an example.
Like that says.
Right, and there are Arabs in Israel. You know, I was in Israel 30 years ago. There were clearly Arabs who really liked being with Jews, and we learned, you know, Jews built up the land and so forth and so on, and Jews were willing to say, listen, you can join us in the prosperity of the land. But the problem is that there are segments of the Arab population that is not interested in that, and that's a problem. Okay, but what happens is that it's in the best interest of these segments to maintain populace that can be perceived to be oppressed, which then ties into the liberal Jews who have universal humanitarian values. And you're absolutely correct that leads to a problem. The fact of the matter is the universal humanitarian concepts within Judaism can yield problems because it may challenge the more specific concepts of Jewish identity. On the other hand, the more specific concepts of Jewish identity, which do not recognize the universal concepts, lead to another problem. Right? You're not going to become, okay, a Ben Avram Avinu who understands you have to connect with the whole world in terms of charity. Yeah.
I was just thinking of the liberal Jews in the States who they have this humanitarian view, and I value that.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think they partake in the BDS movement and
yes.
other very anti-Israel movements because we're not doing what we're supposed to do according to their values.
Exactly true. Exactly true. Because the fact of the matter is to them, the problem, you see, the problem is to understand that to them, this universal aspect of Jewishness, right, is the only Jewishness that they were taught.
Right.
That really was the outgrowth of Reform Judaism in America. It really is. But the fact is the problem, though, is, from our perspective, is that that value is part of Torah. Our issue is, okay, so how do we deal with it? And that's really the problem. So when Kern brought up the issue of the Syrian refugee problem, the fact is it becomes a real problem because that universal humanitarianism, which has been hijacked by the more liberal Jewish perspective, at the cost of any value and understanding the unique status of the Jew, right, still has a value within Torah. So how do we balance it? And it is contradictory. It is a challenge. It's easy basically to say they're going, I don't have to care about it, right? Or even that they're Soni Yisrael and I have to care about it, which makes it more understandable why you're going to be concerned about it. But the fact is you are dealing with a real tough issue. Yeah.
Syrian refugee crisis, actually, they're not Syrian Muslim. They're technically not refugees, most of them. The real refugees are, for the most part, in Jordan, Turkey.
Right.
The ones that go to Europe are sort of economic migrants. So it's sort of like the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman.
Right, right. The fact is that I'm not going to get into the specifics of the details. I'm talking in a more theoretical idea,
But it does have a value
yes.
to get into some of it because.
Yes.
So do we start defining? Okay, if we're going to take a universal perspective from. Do we start letting where do we start making the definition?
That's a definition that exists in terms of how we ever deal with. The truth is that it's an issue in tzedakah. Okay, most people don't recognize that in terms of how they distribute their money, that is designated under the definition of tzedakah, and there actually is an article on our website at nishma.org called the Torah expenditure, where I go through the different categories of what is generally referred to as generic tzedakah. Okay, and what people don't recognize is that the term tzedakah technically means what you are to give to the poor. It does not mean what you give to your shul, what you give to your yeshiva, right? It does colloquially. Okay, and that really is a Torah expenditure, and there's a question of how you prioritize and so forth. It's a big issue, for example, in terms of the needs of a shul versus the needs of the poor, and there's machlokas in Achronim of which one should take priority. The fact of the matter is really Jews are supposed to recognize that they have communal obligations. That communal obligation is to give to the poor, to give to learning, to assist people with medical needs. These are all Gemilas Chesed, which is because stuck is defined as giving to the poor. Poor is a specific definition of aniyim. If a person's not a poor person, but you help him out, that's Gemilas Chesed technically. Still a mitzvah, and still should be something you do. But the fact is that it may not be under the technical definition of tzedakah, but the fact is we don't have to deal with it. There's an idea of helping out and so forth, but the fact is how many people actually think through how they make their donations. So, and then you have to include in that the fact that there's supposed to be some consideration for universal concerns, which also has an aspect. And I know that, for example, and my brother-in-law is involved, is the founder of Vahavta, and the fact is that I support his endeavors and so forth. There's also a Kiddush Hashem aspect to it. Okay, if Jews don't give, to humanitarian causes, how can you expect other people to be supportive of Jews? And it comes up every day in terms of the Holocaust. And if you aren't concerned about other people other people's going through hard times, how could you have expected people to be concerned with Jews going through hard times in the Holocaust? The truth is there's a balance there. But the fact is it really becomes a thoughtful decision of how you balance it out. And it's not just simply, a lot of people have pointed out to me, someone knocks on your door and says, you want to give to this yeshiva, so people sit and say, sure, and they'll write a check to the yeshiva. And I said, and then afterwards they say, did you check out what the yeshiva stands for? Yeah, the yeshiva you just gave for happens to be the main yeshiva for the Neturei Karta. Okay, I'm sure you really wanted to support them. Right? How many people ever really check it out? And then if yeshiva shows up in the door, maybe you have an obligation to yeshiva in town. I know that the rabbis in Toronto put up a sign a long time ago. It says, yes, it's very nice to give Eretz Yisrael, but our yeshivas in town need assistance, and that should be the priority. Just because someone knocks on your door does not necessarily mean that should be your priority. Right? And the fact is what? Do you benefit from something? The truth is, a lot of people think that the greatest tzedakah is when you don't benefit from something. Okay? That's a great Christian concept. Okay? The truth is, from a Jewish perspective, the fact that you benefit increases your obligation. The truth is that these are all considerations. But the point is how do you go think about it? And then you go into that next issue of how do you consider what your universal concept should be. Okay? And those are real issues. Okay? That demand thought and so forth and consideration. And there's no set halachic answers. A lot depends upon your own perspectives and your own feelings in this regard as well. Okay, but the point is that's all part of it. But the fact is, it becomes a very, very difficult issue, especially now in Eretz Yisrael. One of the real issues is the fact that universal issues versus what I define as more national issues, and a real issue, because universal issues is really pushing anti-Israel perspectives. But the fact that you see Jews doing it, it's the fact that they think that that's actually a reflection of the Jewish values, and it is. It's just somewhat distorted. Okay, and the point is how do you deal with it? Yeah.
Well, we had a conversation with a woman, a liberal Jew, and at a party, and she was basically saying all the Jews really need to be unified. You don't understand. We need to be unified. And I said, I think your idea of unification of us is national suicide. Like,
which unified in what way?
That's what I mean. Do you want to be unified with our ideology, or you want us to be identified?
And unified in what? In fact,
and on Yisrael.
With their religion, leftism.
No, the question is unified with what? The fact is, what a lot of people don't recognize, this gets into the real issue of Jewish identity. There was a decision a couple weeks ago by the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. You heard that decision? Okay, Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia made a decision that they will ordain individuals who are involved in intermarriages. Okay? Okay? Okay. In other words, if you study at the, I guess they might have people studying. You have people studying at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College to become Reconstructionist rabbis who are married to non-Jews, right? Okay, and the Reconstructionist says we're going to ordain them. Okay, what are they really saying? So the fact is that the universalism, when we say all Jews get together, it really is under universal ethics. See, the truth is when you get rid of the divine origin of Torah, okay, you get rid of the divine origin of Torah, and people don't really fully understand this. What are you saying the rabbis discussed? If you say Torah Sheba'al Peh did not have a divine origin, or you give all these arguments about the documentary, about documents and so forth and so forth, but if you take away revelation from a Jewish perspective, which is basically the perspective of Reform Judaism and most conservative Judaism, then what were the rabbis discussing? They were basically discussing universal ethics. Greeks were discussing ethics, Chinese were discussing ethics, Jews were discussing ethics. There's no unique Jewish ethics. It's just that this is the discussion of ethics among the Jewish people. Now, did they come to different conclusions than the Greeks and the Chinese? Yes, but why? Because they didn't have telephones and the internet. Right? Mr. Plato in Greece couldn't pick up the phone and speak to whoever in China and said, hey, we just had this problem in the study hall. How did you guys do? Oh, that's a good question. So forth and so forth. And go speak to the Jews discussing their ethics. But nowadays that we have mass communication around the world, ethics is a universal discussion. Right? We are all discussing ethics. And if we're all discussing ethics, then there's nothing defined as Jewish ethics. So therefore, what occurs is that what makes the Jewish people unique. So basically, what makes them as unique is their culture, right? The way they like spirituality. Like I remember reading somewhere. I think there was a synagogue. There was a place. I might be wrong about this. There was a place in Kitchener-Waterloo where a church and a synagogue shared the same place.
Ann Arbor, Michigan too.
What?
Ann Arbor, Michigan too.
Right. And the question came up: what's the difference between a Jew and I know. What's the difference between a Unitarian Christian and a Reformed Jew? And the answer was basically nothing, except that the Unitarian Christian uses Christian motifs for they find that enhances their spirituality, and Jews use Jewish motifs because it enhances the spirituality. But basically they're both trying to do the exact same thing. Right? And if you're really progressive, you learn how to take care of, you learn how to try and touch everyone else's spirituality. I remember this when I was in yeshiva in Florida. We had a relationship with a community college in the yeshiva, which basically allowed the yeshiva to get college credits. And because I already had college degrees and so forth, I became the representative of the yeshiva to the college. So I basically talked to them. So I get a phone call from them one day. They actually got me involved a few times. Okay, I became Rabbi Hecht before I had smicha. Because one time they actually had me do a program with a Christian minister and a Catholic priest on death and dying. And it was a very interesting thing, because after the first 3 minutes, because our process is so different, because it's after CHBURA that we have Shiva and so on, and it's like comfort the mourners. It was like the audience was mostly non-Jews. I became the star of the show, so it basically became Rabbi, which led to a very interesting response. The Catholic priest came over to me, Rabbi, wonderful, I learned so much tonight, right? The Christian minister basically, looked at me and like Jew took over the show. He was really upset. Anyways, that's a little bit. We should get rid of this. Anyways, but the fact is, they asked me one time if I would do. I remember one time they asked me, would I come do a class on Jewish meditation? What's Jewish meditation? Sorry, there are a lot of people involved with Jews, but me, what's Jewish meditation? So I remember saying to them, well, the truth is when we pray, we go back and forth in our prayers. Shuckle, we go back and forth in our prayers, and that helps us concentrate on the prayers. So the person singing it says, oh, that sounds great. Can we try it? I'm sitting there and saying, oh no, what am I going to do? Shuckle, Baruch Atah, come on. I said, no, you need to understand the Jewish. I got out of it. But the fact is that's the world. The world just thinks that Jewishness is just the way you're doing what everyone else is doing. So that's when she says we all be connected to Jewish people, she doesn't mean just the Jewish people. We all got to be connected with good people. Now the truth is that leads to an interesting issue, because when non-Jews were sacrificing their children to their idols, or having orgies in their places of worship, and all that other stuff, right? We Jews clearly stood out, you know, in the sense that we really were different. But nowadays,
We had food with the orgies.
what?
We had food with the orgies.
No, we didn't. No, the fact is no. No, the fact is we were very, very different, and the fact is that we've been somewhat successful because we got the world being moral. The problem is as we got the world caring for others, not killing each other, basically being moral, you run into a non-Jew who is basically practicing, you know, certain aspects of ethics and so forth and so forth. It shows the success of Jewishness in the world. The problem is that for many Jews they lose any reason why we have to be any different, and that's part of the issue. Yeah.
All right, I want to go back to something that you said about Rav Kook many minutes ago.
Yes.
You talked about Rav Kook, who really had a dilemma, and his dilemma was how to be present at the burials of the many Chayalim who were as Chiloni as the day is long,
right.
And yet they gave Damam for Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
So he had to somehow find a way to get through that tension and reconcile that he could be physically present there and thank them, as it were, for giving their lives and their blood for the sake of the state of Israel.
Well, it wasn't Rav Kook. Are you talking about the Raya Kook? You're talking about the Raya Kook died in the 30s.
No, so not the Raya Kook.
So you're talking about his son. You're talking about his son and other people. The fact of the matter is though you have to understand though, in the philosophy of Rav Kook, he believed that the feelings of Zionists is a reflection of a good aspect of the Yiddish neshama of the person. So the Chayal who dies for the sake of Eretz Yisrael, right, is someone who he believes has his commitment to Eretz Yisrael is was a positive commitment and reflected an aspect of the neshama that was positive.
So he ultimately reconciled that tension, could be present there without being looked upon by the rest of the Orthodox and the right world as an apostate.
But the problem is, you know, it's so interesting in terms. Rav Kook was recognized as such a gadol.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm talking with the Raya Kook. Okay.
Yeah.
His son, what do you call it? His son, Tzvi Yehuda. It's also, big. But the Raya Kook, there's a famous story of the Satmar Rav. Okay. The Satmar Rav was in Eretz Yisrael in the 30s. The Satmar Rav was already recognized as an Elul. Okay. So the right wing, what you would call the Turi Karta elements in Eretz Yisrael wanted the Satmar Rav to become their leader in Eretz Yisrael. And when he was in Eretz Yisrael, they were pushing him to go argue with Rav Kook. And they were saying, you go to that Rabbi Kook, you show him why he's wrong. And the Satmar Rav just kept quiet. Didn't say anything. Right? And then finally he kept bugging him. And finally he just opened his mouth and says, you guys don't get it. I go to him to argue that he's wrong. He'll show me why I'm wrong. In other words, you know who you're dealing with? The fact that, and that was the Satmar Rav. Okay, so Satmar Rav, everyone knew who Rav Kook was. Okay, they disagreed with him, but there was no doubt that he was up there in the top 5, and maybe even up there in the top 1. You know, the fact is that but the point is Rav Kook's position, and I told you that Shimshon Hirsch held the opposite. Shimshon Hirsch held that non-committed, non-halachic Jewishness had no value, right? So he had no patience for Zionism that was motivated by non-halachic sources. Okay, so there was that tension, and it reflects aspects of that tension. But the point is, Raya Cook believes that it did have a value, and the Raya Cook had to deal with that value, and the fact that these people were otherwise not observing Torah, and he had tremendous issues. People point out, if you read the Raya Cook's Hesped for Herzl, I'm telling you, it was what?
Called the Mashiach Ben Yosef.
Did he actually say
Yeah.
Mashiach?
But if you understand what Mashiach Ben Yosef
Right,
is, it's not
right. The fact is that his language was very, very careful. Okay, I don't know the details of the thing, but the truth is, it was a hesped written in a. And people point this out, that if you read his hesped for Herzl, it was. It reflected the tension on that level, okay, of reflecting a value in Eretz Yisrael. But the point is I'm not trying to take away from that value. I'm saying that that tension is perhaps part and parcel of the reality of Jewish commitment. The point is, what we're dealing with tonight is that tension between universalism and more specific Jewish consciousness is a tension, and it's not easy to work out. It's very, very difficult. Yeah.
So on the topic, and who what? Rav Kook called Shimshon for Hirsch Nazir Kadosh. That could have different meanings also.
Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, but the fact is that you know something. It's a reality of Jewish thought. We have differing opinions. Strong differing opinions. Right, and Elu means, pardon?
This is Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, two different perspectives, all fight.
And those two different perspectives, you learn how to accept contradictory opinions.
Okay, so we have a real issue now. It's great to debate.
Yeah.
It's great to go back 3,000 years and look at the different debates. We have a real human issue right now.
Yes.
Should Israel be supporting, or the Jews in the diaspora be supporting the refugees that we just label them Syrian refugees, but as Ishai brought up, that who are they really? What is it an economic plea? Is it who are they?
And by the way, an economic plea, that's legitimate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
They're under poverty.
But then we go back to the definition. Are we taking care of those who are under threat of life?
The fact is that it is a tough decision, and every person has to look at it and consider it, and consider their own personal leanings and their own personal issues.
I think the decision would be simpler if they were staying there and they needed support for food and clothing. The decision would be simpler.
Yes.
The universalist in us would say, send them money, send them food, send them support, send them help, send them whatever they need.
But the fact is, that doesn't seem to be the fact is that doesn't seem to be an option, and in many ways, the reason it's not an option is because it's a real mess over there. I mean, the fact is that, I don't want to get political here, but when Stephen Harper basically said all these people are promoting Syrian refugees, and then they're angry about us attacking ISIS. Listen, I'm not going to be sending army in or whatever it is, but the point of the matter is that there's a problem there. The problem is you have people who basically are committed to causing havoc to these people, and you're not dealing with that problem either. It's very nice to say, hey, listen, let's take them in and so forth and so forth. Well, so why aren't you
haven't solved the problem? You've just put a big band-aid on it.
So why aren't you also saying we should go after ISIS and so forth? I mean, the point is that it's a tough decision. When I point in the personal aspect, it also comes down to your own individual needs and concerns and so forth. It's like if you have individuals in need in the community here, you can't help out other people because your community goes first. But the fact is that there's considerations. But what happens is, in many ways, is like this universalism becomes the prime concern. So it's like you can go into some places in the Jewish world, and we need money for Syrian refugees, and trying to get money for the homeless here. That's like pulling teeth. But Syrian refugees is something different. Yeah.
So I'm going to say a couple things, but I'm going to speak very personally, but I should disclose to everyone in the room that I work for JIAS, Jewish Immigrant Aid Services, and you may have seen in the press in recent weeks that we are in fact involved in helping Syrian refugees.
Right.
So I want to say, having a little bit of insider knowledge in the situation, that the people who are being deemed refugees are real refugees, really under threat of life. You're correct. We are helping a number who have already escaped Syria temporarily. So they're in Lebanon, they're wherever they are now, but they are not in safe situations in Lebanon. And they are also treated very much as outsiders, not accepted into society. They are not, the children can't go to school. So there's no real future, no real life for them there. And as much as we want to say, like, yes, we should, we should be fighting ISIS, or we should be fighting, the other side of it is to be fighting ISIS, or the other side is to be, telling the government of Lebanon, you have to have a program to accept strangers in your midst and integrate them into society. On sort of like the individual basis, how can we help now? Those are sort of global things that is very difficult as an individual or as a community coming together, I think, to really have the impact. Are there mechanisms where we can help these refugees and help them have a better life? Yes. Some of these refugees are either in process, or there's one refugee family that we are working with that members, distant relatives, are in Toronto. And these are not the haters of Israel. They are incredibly grateful. They are fully aware that they're working with the Jewish community, incredibly grateful that the Jewish community is reaching out and helping. And it's very easy to characterize, all of Syria in the broad strokes of, what we've seen so much of throughout history, the haters of Israel, the people who have fought against Israel, the ISIS. These people who are suffering are not that. Many of them are Christian, many of them are Kurdish, many of them are, other ethnicities within Syria who are really suffering. And along with the universal aspect, a lot of what goes through my head in thinking about this kind of thing is also the notion of Or LaGoyim. Like, what does it mean to be an Or LaGoyim? I think this is part of it. And I think part of being a light unto the other nations is also not doing it at the times where it seems like obvious and easy, but in these moments where we have to struggle through those issues of what has the nation of Syria done to my people as a whole, and now I'm going to rise above that to say that yes, I see individuals suffering in your country, and because I am part of a community that can do something to help, might want to reach out and do that.
But by the way, the Or LaGoyim issue is an aspect of community. There's a rabbi named Eliyahu Ben Zamogek who wrote a book in the 1800s. He himself was a big makubal, but he also was an expert in different theologies. He wrote a book about Christianity, Judaism, and what he called Mohammedanism. And he pointed out very powerfully, Christianity attacked the Jewish people for not being universal. The fact of the matter is, one of the arguments of Christianity was very non-nationalistic. That statement about give unto God was God and Caesar unto Caesar, it was basically a nationalistic concept, but we basically believed that nationalism was of this world. Okay, so it's like that's a nationalistic concept, and so forth, being nationalistic, but there's a concept, but God is not nationalistic, and therefore God is universal, and that was their great critique of Judaism in terms of nationalism. the Christian concept, what Rabbi Bezamoga points out is that really one of the concepts of Judaism was to create the model society. So the point is not just Jews as individuals setting goals for reaching out and teaching ethics for humanity, which is what Avram Avinu did in terms of being the prototype of the individual who became the ideal of what we're supposed to be. Basically, what the concept of the Torah creating a Jewish nation was that the nation should be a model society to the world. And that's why Eretz Yisrael becomes significant and so forth. By the way, in terms of the concept of Eretz Yisrael, the idea of settling in Eretz Yisrael is not just a concept of living in the land, but setting up a political entity in the land. And the fact is, the Torah is creating the model political entity, which is supposed to be the model for the world of a ethical entity, which deals with a lot of issues. Like, as for example, does a model ethical society have universal health care? Okay? And most likely from a Jewish perspective his answer is yes, and so forth. The fact is those are the questions that exist from a Jewish societal perspective of Or L'Goyim. So you're absolutely correct in that. The fact is that there's a concept of Jews doing that. The point is that, as I said, Avram Avinu was a model as an individual to the world, and then we as and then the Jewish nation is to be a model nationalistically, and that's what we're involved in. The point is that these are all considerations in making that decision. It's a tough decision, but the fact is, it is a tough decision. But the point is that it's balancing of the needs of the Jewish community within the greater needs of the humanitarian community, and one does not preclude the other necessarily. Okay? And the issue is both ways. The overextension of the universal means you lose sight of the uniqueness of the Jewish concept, of Jewishness and Jewish ethics. The over-concern of just being concerned about Jews means you lose sight of the universal concept, and there's a tension. Yeah.
There is a tension. I just want to comment on that very quickly. So both within our organization, and there are a number of other synagogue and Jewish groups that have joined with us to be involved. Right. And in our own organization, and every group that I'm aware of that has decided that they want to help, has made it very clear that whatever, the normal funds are that they raise, in their particular corner of the world to support Jews and help Jews and whatever is untouched, and that this is over and above, right? Yeah. So that there's no way, while we feel, there's definitely an element of the community moved to help, there's no way that we're diverting one penny that otherwise would have gone to a Jew for this effort.
Right, and that's an important consideration.
Okay. I just want to mention one thing. Then we'll have to wrap it up, but we can continue the discussion.
Okay. You, Yishai, and who else wanted? Right, Ruben wanted. Okay.
This is just from.
And then I'll have to comment on Ruben's comment.
These couple of sentences are just taken from a novel, but the novel is to the point, and it comes from historic. We got to remember, to Joanna's point, these are people who are suffering. The tension people are having is, how do you decide who are the real people suffering and really need it, and those who are trying
That's one of the tensions.
Wait a minute. So going back to our own recent history, this takes place in the UK. These are the refugees, the Jewish refugees who got out and made it to the UK. And there was all kinds of government policies. They let them in, but how long do we allow them to stay? Let's kick them out. The war's over now. Let's send them back home. Well, they had no more home. So there are more Jews here than the government figure of 40,000. They thought they were being overrun by Jews. There goes our country. There goes the UK. We have nothing. We have no housing. We have no food. It says... who speaks honestly and fairly about these people is the Honorable Minister Ernest Bevin. He was trying to get rid of the Jews. And then...
But you see, what happened is that's one of the problems that Europe then faced with the Islam, with the Muslim influx. what happened is that Europe understood that their attitudes of self-importance and the importance of their own culture basically said, we don't want any Jews. Now, the truth of the matter is I've heard someone, talk about niqabs, and someone saying that if they don't like following our culture, they should just go back to where they came from and follow their own religion there. Great. Okay? Yeah, that was Torquemada's argument. Torquemada was an anti-Semite. He basically said, I want Spain to only have Catholic culture. The Jews can leave with your money. We have no problems with you leaving your money, just don't live here. The fact is that in Europe, in many ways, before the war and that concept you were saying after the war, was we just don't want the influence of your world. Then, when Europe really saw the full aspect of the Holocaust and their own thing, they sort of responded with the ultimate other way, right, which was let everyone in. And anyone who's a member of the British Commonwealth is going to be a British citizen. And next thing you know, the specific culture that was England was being challenged. And people said, wait a second, we had a culture. We wanted that culture. And that's a tension. Now, the truth of the matter is that led to another aspect, that leads to back and forth and so forth and so forth. But the truth is, that's part of the tension. We're not going to be overrun by whatever Syrians we're taking in. We're not taking in 1 million Syrians.
No, I'm just saying, that's the point.
Right. But the fact is that there's always a fear of the other that exists with many people. The fact is that fear, sadly, can infiltrate Jewish perspectives as well. And we have to be very, very careful of that.
Wait till they get here for one winter, they're going to want to go back.
Okay.
Okay, when you talk about Orachim, so leaving aside this specific issue with Syrian refugees or whatever, there's always, no, maybe not always, but quite often there's an undercurrent of resentment for someone who helps you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I heard part of the problem with black anti-Semitism was the Jews tried to help them a lot. So, a lot of people were grateful, but a lot of other people, the message that they got was the Jews are powerful, they have they don't somehow take their interest, so they had more respect for other communities, let's say Greek or whatever, that just minded their own business. And so when Jews do that, I think that undercurrent is going to be there. Not with all individuals, but you're basically setting up a lot of people to be anti-Semitic.
There's a way to get stuck. Okay. When we talk about the sensitivity to the poor person, getting them a job, maintaining their dignity. I had this argument with someone once, or someone said he invited Orchim, sort of a guest, but he never went to someone's house. He always wanted to invite Orchim, but he never went to someone's house because he didn't want to impose. And I pointed out to this person that do you understand what you're saying to the other person? Not to give them the right to invite you back, right? The fact is you have to maintain the person's dignity. That has to be a tremendous concern within the halacha. A concern that whenever you do give, you are concerned about the dignity of the person, and that is a concern because the fact is that if you do it in an undignified fashion, it's improper. Like really, it's not a nice way of doing it. But in addition, there can be a what do you call it? A backlash, right? The fact is, the person will say, something. The person embarrassed me in doing that, and so forth. And that happens to be a very real concern. And I'm not, the fact is we have to be very sensitive to that. I remember, this was in the 70s. I was at either the late 60s or the 70s with YU, I went to some big event in Madison Square Gardens, and there was one of the leaders of the NAACP who was asked to speak. I think it was I think it was something for Soviet Jewry, and he got up to speak, and then he said, "Yeah, we'll help you with your Jews and Soviet, but you got to help us also." And he started talking about the needs of the blacks in America, and yeah, he's concerned about Jews, but he's concerned about citizens here in America. Blacks need your help, and so forth and so forth. And what the guy was saying, really, it wasn't appropriate. It was a conference, so you sit there and say this, and you make some public statement that anyone who's oppressed, and we're going to be concerned about it, and yeah, okay. The guy was basically saying, you help us out, we'll help you out. But if you don't help us out, we're not going to help you out. What happened is that there were a tremendous amount of boos that started filling Madison Square Gardens. And I was so embarrassed. No, what the guy said was inappropriate. But you're booing a guy who basically saying, help us out who are oppressed because we're blacks? Use your seichel. And you're basically saying the same thing. The fact is you have to do it in such a way and so forth. And there's ways of doing it. And the fact is there's also a balance in the sense that and in the way I think that Judaism and other organizations are doing it, you want to do it by saying we are Jews and we're helping you out, but you also want to do it and say we're human beings. You're a human being. You don't want to come across like we're Jews and we're helping you out because we're Jews, because we're good Jews and so forth, which basically means you're not part of us, we're helping you out. What you want to say, we're Jews and this is part of our values, but the values means to care for other human beings. So that what? On a certain level. On a certain level you have to have both. And that's an important concept to remember. Okay? In a sense of balancing this out. And really what I wanted to get at tonight is the tension between the two concepts. And it's difficult. And I don't have set answers. It's difficult. Okay? But the fact is that it's a real, it's one of the difficult aspects of Jewish values. Jewish values are difficult because Jewish values often give contradictory values to opposites. Okay? Okay? And that's it. Ruven.
And then we...
I'm a little confused here. Jews are a very small population of the world.
Yes.
And we're talking like we have some kind of a power to change the world, like flicking a switch.
Yeah.
So or we are delusional, or we have a power. We have to decide if we believe that we have a power to change the world, or we're delusional. And what I'm saying is, Obama said to Netanyahu, you know what, I made an agreement with Iran and I give you the most sophisticated airplane, F-35, which everyone costs $300, $500 million. And you're thinking about it, they said the world is crazy. You know what you could do with $500 million to help refugees and this? And then we think, and we're talking about, okay, how much we have the power, and suddenly, oh, we can solve the problem of the world, we can be all agreeing. So where is the truth? I'm really confused. Do I have a
Excellent, excellent. You've raised another issue of the conflict of being Jewish, right? What do we say? We're supposed to carry two lines with us every day. What are they? Right? Ani Afer ve'efer, Avram Seifedin, and Bishvili Nivra Olam. The fact of the matter is that we are both. We're nothing and we're everything. The fact of the matter is you're absolutely correct. We're delusional and we think we can do something. The fact of the matter is, you really think about this. The Jewish community is worried about Syrian refugees. Right? The fact of the matter is, let all the other communities give what they give and we'll be a drop in the bucket. Right? the fact of the matter is, that's what being Jewish is. And you're right. Right, you are confused because we're confused. We are to live with that contradiction. It's another one of our contradictions. Okay? I mean, you read statements by Gedolim who were like the minds of they sit there and say, who am I don't know what I'm talking about, and so forth. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, what can we do? The truth of the matter is, and this really comes from our faith, in the sense that we have the power to affect the world. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us. On the other hand, right? It doesn't seem like we have too much power, right? Truth is that it's a difficult thing, but the truth is that what we really have to do is deal with the issues. See, what we're really doing here tonight, let's face it, we're not going to change the world, right? We're going to save maybe, you know, we save one family, we help one Syrian refugee family. There are millions of other people. We're not going to be able to save all of them. But the truth of the matter is what's really significant is that we spent an evening learning Torah about it. That's really what we're about. Okay? What we're really about is the fact that this is on our mind. We want to know what the right thing is to do. We want to know. Avraham Avinu was not successful in defending stone. But the fact of the matter is the greatness was it was on his mind about what to do. Okay? And sometimes you have to understand it's not necessarily in the conclusion, it's in what we're thinking about, how we're dealing with it. And the point is this is something we have to think about, and there's a whole much more to talk in terms of universalism and particularism. We just touched upon the Raya Cook versus Rav Cook versus Shimshon Hirsch. Tremendous differences in the approach there. The approach within the Jewish community. I mean, there's so much issues in terms of how we relate. These are all difficult issues. And the truth is that when you really look at Jewish thought, the issue is in the fact that you recognize the full spectrum of thought.